All right, we know that Photoshop is a destructive image editor. Camera Raw, which is a plugin that shows up in Bridge and is also the engine that runs Lightroom and is also the engine that opens a RAW file if you open it in Photoshop, a RAW file, in order to keep those RAW photos clean, raw, non-destroyed. All the data is still there. Now, if you open Photoshop, you'll see, and the internet is wrong about this 98% of the time, you'll see there's a filter inside Photoshop. And it says you could use the Camera Raw filter. Now, the Camera Raw is the non-destructive image editor. But this Camera Raw filter is an imposter. It is still destructive. It only allows you to use the tools you may become familiar with when you edit in RAW, in Bridge, or Lightroom. These tools are fakes. Now, I love these tools. I love using these tools when I'm already in Photoshop on a TIFF file or a JPEG file. But I don't use this filter on RAW files. I go back to Bridge or Lightroom for that matter. Now let me show you how you can test and see that you're in the imposter and not in the real McCoy. Okay? First, let's go to Bridge. And I'm in the Camera Raw editor in Bridge, and I just want to draw your attention. Now, I'm in the 2020 version of Bridge, so some of you may be using an older version, and what you would see in the older version may be what I'm about to show you across the top. But now, in the 2020 version of Bridge, they've moved those tools that used to be across the top along the side. And that's what I'm pointing your attention to. Particularly over on the side, you see there's a crop tool and rotate. Since 2019, they've moved crop, which was an isolated tool, and the two rotate tools into one. It's crop and rotate. And if I were to crop and rotate, notice that tool exists. Here, in the real Camera Raw editor, the crop and rotate tool exists. Something else that exists is this little pop-up that says snapshots. Snapshots we'll talk more about in a future course. But just keep note of those two things. Back to Photoshop. In Photoshop, if I open an image with the Camera Raw filter, which like I say I adore, but I only know that I use this knowing that I am still destroying data. I may like the result, but data is being lost. Here is the Camera Raw filter in Photoshop, in 2020 Photoshop, and you can see, oh yes, those tools exist over on the side. Which tools exist on the side? Because I no longer see the crop tool. The crop and rotate tool are missing. And so is the snapshots tool. This is the fake. This is the imposter. And this is how you know it. Cancel. Now, we learned in a previous bonus video that we could be smart objects ourselves if we utilize smart objects. That's what I want to teach you about the Camera Raw filter in Photoshop. Don't run it. Don't run it without first converting your images in Photoshop, your layers, into smart objects, because then when you do, you can run that Camera Raw filter and no further loss will occur. You can make changes. Let's make a change here. Let's change the saturation. There, I've made a very drastic change to saturation. I've desaturated it, which makes it grayscale. I'm going to say OK. Now, because I saved this as a smart layer, a smart object first, these two layers here below show. One is a layer mask. We'll talk more about that in week 2's video. But the second is a reminder that I've run the Camera Raw filter. And if I double click that, I can go back in time. The color has not actually been removed. It just looks like it has. If I've run the Camera Raw filter on a smart object, I can recover any change I've ever made. And that is a great tip.